Have you ever considered that the gifts that God has given you before you came to this earth in the pre-earth life are connected to the struggles that you deal with in your personal life every day? I believe this is the case, and I'm going to tell you how that's played out in my life. My name is Jaron O'Driscoll. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and my biggest struggle in my life is anxiety. The fear of what could happen in my life and my inability to control it has haunted me my entire life. I fight it constantly to this day, but through the restored gospel and my faith in that, I have actually found great meaning and purpose in my life through that struggle that I deal with. And that's the story I want to tell you today, is about how I found meaning through struggling with my own worst personal demon, anxiety. So just some background on me and who I am. I was born and raised in Utah. Like a lot of Latter-day Saints. I was born and raised in a very small town, rural community, more cows than people type of town. And this was in the 90s when I was growing up. And it was a lot like the 80s were in the suburbs of other parts of the country. I grew up, running around with a BB gun and riding my bike to the river to go fishing, and spent a lot of time outdoors. It's where I really find, and still to this day find, my peace, is spending time outdoors and connecting with nature. It's been a huge part of my life and been a big help in helping me combat that anxiety that I struggle with on a daily basis. I was raised with a very traditional upbringing, good family, faithful in the church. Grew up doing blue collar work, started building log cabins at the age of 15 and been doing blue collar work ever since in lots of different fields. Learned how to work hard from a young age doing that, come from a line of blue collar workers. And you would think with that background and upbringing that I was raised in a Republican household. I wasn't really into politics, and my family didn't really teach me anything about politics growing up. It wasn't until my early 20s that I got into politics on my own and decided to start diving into that and developed my understanding that I had at the time of where I stood politically. And I think from the pre-earth realm, we're kind of sometimes, pre-programmed, or those intelligences, that we're created from, that we have this disposition towards certain things, and freedom, liberty, and, personal responsibility. Those types of things were always something that was kind of ingrained into my attitude and my psyche. And I started going down that path with politics, and my views kept going right, further and further right, until one day it went to a logical extreme in my mid-20s, to where taking it a bit too far, became a self-proclaimed anarchist. And the thing that is the scariest looking back is that I really thought that anarchism squared with the gospel. You've got to understand, anarchism is not what most people think it is. It's not flipping cars and Molotov cocktails and riots in the streets. That's not anarchy. Anarchy comes from, if you break the word down, anarchy, it's anarchos, which means no rulers. Now, it doesn't mean no rules, it just means no rulers. And so the idea is that we become a utopian society where everybody is just kind to one another. We all take care of each other and we defend each other. And it's just utopia, where we need no overriding authority, no governing authority to rule. And the problem with that is it's a utopian society, just like communism is. And, socialism that leads into that. And that was the scariest part that I didn't even realize at the time, is I had gone down a very dark path, and I had wrapped up my identity in this, right? Like for 2 or 3 years, I had, wrapped my identity up in being an anarchist, and I felt really, different, and like I stood out, and I always had this argument when anybody, talked down on anarchy. It was always that, well, they just don't know what anarchy is. It's not riots in the streets. It's not flipping cars. It's not all that stuff like happened with the BLM riots. It's not anything like that. And so they just don't understand what it is. While I was reading my scriptures one night, I was reading in Doctrine and Covenants, and I found a section where Joseph Smith actually all but condemns anarchy. And I remember sitting there and reading that and just turned my world upside down, because my identity was wrapped up in this. And I remember sitting there and thinking, and the thought came to my head, the same thought I had with anybody that argues with me about anarchy. It was that, oh, Joseph Smith just must not have known what real anarchy is. And I remember in that moment, I caught it. I caught that. And I thought, you know what? I know where that road leads. If I open up that can of worms, there's no putting that lid back on Pandora's box. And I know the path that leads if I start doing that. And so it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, where I had to just let it go and go, you know what? I've got to drop this. My worldview is obviously skewed. And this idea of anarchy came from podcasts I was listening to. And so I decided I'm not going to listen to any of that. No more politics. I'm just going to listen to LDS podcast. I did a lot of driving for work and had a lot of time to consume a lot of this content. So I start listening to LDS podcasts, and I quickly realized that at least back then, there were only a couple kinds of different LDS podcasts. One was where it's basically just, a recorded Sunday school session. The next is the, average anti-Mormon podcast, the Mormon Stories, John DeLyn's of the world. And the third was those that are doing these podcasts, but wanting to be, edgy, hip, whatever they're trying to do, but they start going down these paths of looking at all this, deep doctrine and church history and getting it from all these anti-Mormon sources, and then slowly watching them progress into where they fall away from the church on their podcast. And that started happening, and I was listening to these things, and all these things were coming to my head. I didn't have answers for any of these questions about things I didn't know about church history and about doctrine, things that were only coming from, one place. And I started having a faith crisis. And, up to this point, I was even right before that doing a podcast where I was going, oh, I'm not an anarchist anymore, but I'm a minarchist. I'm anarchy light. And I was even recorded about a dozen episodes of a podcast where I'm trying to, weave the gospel in with still anarchist principles. And I remember coming home from a studio one night, walking home, and I had this distinct thought come to my head that said, Jaron, you're becoming a modern day Korihor. And that was crazy to me. I decided, I'm not doing this anymore. I've got to let all this stuff go. I've got to let this path I'm going down. I've got to get on a different path somehow. And that led me to those podcasts going, okay, I'm going to listen to LDS podcasts. And that sent me even further into, a faith crisis with all these questions that I'd never, known or heard about church history and about gospel principles. And I remember getting down on my knees, and I remember where I was praying, and I just told the Lord, like, God, I got to know how this all fits in. I've got all these questions now. I don't even know where to start. I got to know what's true and how all these things that I've learned fit in. What's going on? And I remember getting a distinct answer. Very few times that I've gotten an immediate answer. This might have been the only time I got an immediate answer in my life to a prayer right away. And I got this prompting that just said, Jaron, I will give you the answer when the time is right. And I said, okay, that's good enough for me. That's good. I'm done with this. I'm turning off the podcast. I'm not doing any of this. I'm not listening to anything but, just scriptures. And I'm just going to do nothing but scriptures. And so I did that for about a year. And a year later, I was in Sunday school, and Sister Henninger in our ward was giving a lesson. And she mentioned in passing something about a passage in the Book of Mormon that said the migrating beasts were buffalo. And I thought, whoa, what? And it was just in passing. It was just really quick. And I was like, well, that makes total sense. And I'm sitting there reading through about the migrating beasts that were being hunted. And I said, what's going on with this? I said, but buffalo, I pulled her aside after class, and I said, that makes total sense, but didn't everything happen in South America? Isn't, Panama, the narrow neck of land? And she just looks at me and goes, like, you could tell she's done this before, and with patience of a mother, just said, Jaron, I've got a book that I need you to read. And so she dropped it off later that day, read this book by Rod Meldrum. I can't remember which one it is, but it's his coffee table book is what it's commonly called. And I read through that whole thing. And I was just like, after that, I was like, well, this is where it happened. It happened in North America. That's awesome. And all those things in that book that it laid out, it just, everything made sense. And that kind of primed me for what happened about a year after that. So this is about 2 years after I got down and prayed, and the Lord told me that he would give me an answer when the time was right. And I remember a thought coming to my head just randomly out of nowhere, that said, where does that quote come from that says something about even the elect of God will be deceived? And I was like, well, that came out of nowhere. And I thought, okay, maybe it's time to reopen this. And I looked in Gospel Library, nothing there on it. And this thought came to me, Google it. And I was like, I know what Google's going to do if I put anything like that in there. It's all going to be anti-Mormon propaganda. And the Spirit came to me again and said, just Google it, Jaron. And so I Googled it. The third option down was article by a guy named Ryan Nelson from the Firm Foundation, bookofmormonevidence.com. And I'll spare you the long story. It's a whole story on its own, but that led me down a path that led me through Rod Meldrum to the Joseph Smith Foundation with Hannah and James Stoddard, and learning all of the things from a faithful perspective that I had all these faith crisis questions too, and really dove into all these topics and basically looking at all the accusations of anti-Mormon propaganda from a faithful standpoint, from people that had researched this and are giving both sides of it, and not hiding or backing down from things that happened, but giving the context. And I learned and understood things that actually strengthened my testimony. And I realized that there is no faith crisis question that cannot be answered with a faithful answer that promotes and builds testimony. And that was huge for me. So this became a really important time for me, and it was kind of a whirlwind because I'm meeting all these amazing people, building lifelong relationships, and also understanding just how real Satan is and how much work he's doing. Because the first conference I went, I'd already started a podcast, had been invited there to, be recording there at the event and interviewing some of the guests. And while I was there, I met amazing people, but also met people that were falling away, that believed in the Book of Mormon, but had been wronged by the church somehow, and in their eyes, and were leaving. John DeLynne's people were there. Had a talk with John DeLynne's, one of his co-hosts, for quite a while. And it was a big whirlwind because there's all this stuff going on, learning new things and new people, and just seeing how much there's opposition to all of it as well. And it was, just a real shock for me going through that time. It was eye-opening and great at the same time, but a real whirlwind to say the least. And met a lot of great people that were in the same spaces as me, that had the same desires and interests and beliefs in homeschooling and personal preparedness, freedom, liberty, all these types of things. And it was really great to understand that I wasn't alone, because I felt that way for a long time, like it was just me, that I'm alone in this, and all the crazy things going on in the world, everything that was going on with COVID at the time. It made me feel a lot better about that I wasn't the only one, that wasn't, capitulating and thinking that, I'm alone in all this as I'm watching everybody around me, just doing the song and dance. But then because of all of this that's going on, the anxiety that I had experienced from, multiple different things throughout my life, one of the biggest ones was a near-death experience I had back in 2016. And all these other things, were starting to pile up a little bit. And so I really felt at that time that I needed to be part of this, that I needed to do more. And though I knew there was opposition to all of it, and that was, starting to give me a little bit of anxiety, I knew that there was something more the Lord wanted me to do. And I didn't know what it was. I just knew that was the door opening for me. That whole experience I had reading the scriptures and flipping that switch in my brain to not go down that path of criticizing or acting like I know better than Joseph Smith did. That whole thing led me to this point. And this was just the door opening for what it was that I feel is my purpose on this earth. And that whole thing opened up the door for the path that the Lord has for me to go down. And so I started a podcast. Originally it was Mormon Traditionalist Podcast, and then it became Mormon Patriot Project, as I was trying to figure out what all these things were and what that path is that I was supposed to go down. And I stopped Mormon Patriot Project and was taking some time and kind of just figuring out what is it that the Lord wants me to do, because I feel like there's all these things in the periphery, but I didn't know what that overarching umbrella was that encompassed all of it. And I felt like all these little pieces I kept getting that I kept thinking, oh, that's it. I kept chasing and making that the thing, are just bits and pieces and parts of that. And so during that time, like, I'm trying to figure this out. I'm on a piece of family property in a rural part of Utah. I mean, we have some space there. I have animals. I have goats, sheep, pigs, chickens, ducks, all these animals. And I'm being as self-sustaining as I can, self-sufficient, and trying to live that type of lifestyle and kind of getting kind of comfy in it. But I felt like I needed to do more. But I at the time was kind of being held back because I was too comfy. And I knew that. And I had talked with my wife that, maybe we would have, for the right opportunity, I could stand living in the city for a little bit as a sacrifice, but it's not something I can do forever. And when I finally opened up and said, okay, I'm okay with that if the right thing came along, the right thing happened to come along, and a good opportunity came up in Las Vegas. And literally the position was offered to me and we had moved within a few weeks. And we had just uprooted. We had been there for our whole lives in Utah. I had spent most of my life there in my rural hometown. And we just uprooted and went because I knew we were supposed to be doing more. And spent a year there. While I was there, all these other things, a near-death experience I had in 2016, all these other things, feeling like I need to be doing more and don't know what it is, along with a lot of other things, the anxiety and stress from my past came up and came to a head and accumulated there. And I just had a mental breakdown, and my anxiety really got the best of me to the point where I couldn't function. I lost like a week of work. And, I've been on and off medication for my anxiety through my life. And, I had to, get back on it at that time, which I really don't want to do. I do not like how overprescribed medications are, and I don't want to be on them. And I've been on and off throughout my life, but that was a real, a downer for me to have to make that decision. But I realized that, this is not where I want to be. And this place, the city, being there was stressing me out. And I really at the time didn't realize how much that had played into it until we were no longer there. But, the Lord has ways that are higher than our ways, and we don't always know what he's doing or why he's doing it. But that job opportunity fell through pretty hard, pretty fast. And we were at a point where we had to decide what we're going to do, where we're going to go. We couldn't stay in Vegas. My health wouldn't allow it. And we had kind of fallen behind. We had lived in, a rural area on, a pretty low rent payment for 6 years, while the rest of the country had, gone way past that with, rent rates and cost of housing going way up all around. And realized, homeschooling is very important to us. We'll not send our kids to school. And so we had, really no choices. Utah was more expensive than Vegas. And so we had to go where we could afford to go. And somewhere we decided to move within, again, a few weeks. I found a job and found a place to live. And we moved to where we had been looking for a long time and talking for a long time, kind of feeling a push for a while to go, but just hadn't pulled the trigger. And so we made the jump and moved to Arkansas. So up until that point, I had all of these things bearing down on me, right? I've been dealing with, guilt from not serving a mission, dealing with the PTSD from, when I came close to death, from kind of a freak medical emergency back in 2016. And, all these other things, that add up. And being there in Vegas just kind of accumulated everything and the stress of this new opportunity that was going to be a lot of responsibility. And all of that is amazing how fast that melted away when we got physically out of the city and got here to Arkansas. And having nature again, it was something where I always got peace my whole life. Grew up doing a lot of hunting, a lot of fishing. It's always been really important to me. I love spending time outdoors, doing just about anything. And that's where a lot of my peace came from. And I just wasn't getting that in Vegas. And here it's everywhere. And I felt so much more in tune with the Spirit. And I feel like I'm getting so much more direct connection with the Lord and understanding of what his will is for me. And being somewhere where you're not in a healthy mindset, I didn't realize or understand how much that could affect your life and your life's purpose. It honestly really felt like coming home. And all these improvements are happening. And with the help of Ian Wendt, a lot of you probably know who Ian is, owner of Official Patriot Gear. Been in his coaching group for a while now. And a lot of that from Ian that I've learned has really helped me to understand that there's really a connection between the things you struggle with and the purpose that you have here on this earth, what you're made to do. And I think a lot of that is we have a purpose. We came here for a reason. This time in this day, there's a reason we came here. And President Nelson even said this. He said, I think we'll find that when we get to the other side, that we were asking and choosing to be saved for this time, that we wanted to be here at this time for a reason, because we had a desire, which I also think ties into, we had proclivities, talents, and the types of things, the gumption that is needed today to push back on evil and push forth God's work in the kingdom of God here on the earth. And I think the reason why there's this connection between the things we struggle with and our purpose and our destiny and the things that we're supposed to be doing here is because Satan knows he knew us before we came here, and he knows what we're capable of, and he knows what we're supposed to be doing here. And I think he takes the direct path of what's going to fight that the most and hold us back the most and the hardest. And understanding that and realizing that, and thank you so much, Ian, for doing this for me and helping me understand this. And for any of you that are interested, the Free Collective is the group. I highly recommend looking into it and joining it. Has made all the difference in my life. It is really important to have the right people in your corner and helping you understand a lot of this stuff. And I figured out and learned that my purpose in life was tied directly to that, to my biggest struggles, my anxiety and my fear that I struggled with my whole life. There's a reason that I struggled with that. And it's because that was tied to what my purpose is and what I'm supposed to be doing here. And so in all this time, there's things I've overlooked as I'm trying to figure out what that purpose is. I've been trying to find that umbrella for years. And I remember something that Ian Wendt asked one time. He's always asking, like, what do you want? What do you want? You got to figure out what that thing is you want. And as part of this, a lot of the things I've learned from him, one of the things was, what is it that really fires you up and lights you up? When was the last time you really felt like, man, this just feel awesome about something you've done? And I really thought about it and didn't know. And it wasn't until, weeks later that I was sitting and thinking about it. And I realized 3 things that happened in the last several years that really made me feel like that. So 3 stories here for you. 1, we used to go every year to some family property in Idaho, not too far from West Yellowstone. And we go every year and do a lot of fun stuff, stay in a cabin. And this one time, a couple of years ago, we were at a separate family cabin, and we heard from somebody that somebody had gotten into our cabin that we were staying at, and that people, it's on private property. It's down right by the Snake River. And we had been told that, there's a bunch of cars pulling out of there and something's going on. And so we go down there, we get back, get in our car, head down there, what's going on. And there's nobody there, but a note's been left there that said, and we looked around, there was some of our stuff had been taken out of our rooms. It looked, obviously people had been through there. And I was like, what happened? Somebody came into our cabin and went through our stuff. And I felt really violated. I'm reading this note and it said, we're sorry. We were on the river rafting. They had, I think, a couple of dozen people in their party. And this freak storm came through, lightning and dumping rain. It was not safe. And they needed somewhere to take shelter. And we were the only place anywhere near. They had to get off the river. And they had somebody in their group that was diabetic, that was going into diabetic shock. They had some disabled people and several very small children with them. And they explained that they were profusely grateful that it was there, and they felt really bad that they came in and used some of our towels and blankets for their kids that were freezing, soaking wet, and that there was juice in the fridge so that their diabetic that was with them could get stabilized, and that there was just somewhere safe they could go to take refuge from this dangerous storm that rolled through. That was kind of a freak thing that nobody even knew was going to be coming through. And for about an hour, I was just like, there's no excuse. This is making me feel very violated. And I afterwards had to really, had the Spirit coming to me and humbling me. And everybody else there was the same way, or all talking about it and how this isn't okay. And I realized, if that was me and my family on that river, how grateful would I have been for that to be there? And if I had a child that was a diabetic having those problems, or that was freezing cold and I wasn't prepared with anything, would I have done anything different? And they even offered, said, we'll pay for any laundry costs and all this. And it wasn't until, weeks later, I finally called, because they put their number on there, and just said, hey, don't worry about it. I'm not upset or anything. Don't worry. I'm just glad that there was a place there for you guys to go. And she was very grateful. And I'm glad that I changed my attitude on that. And that really started making me feel, after I'd gotten through that, had to repent and go through that phase, that felt incredible to know that we had something there, that we had something prepared there for people. Even though we hadn't tried to really prepare it, we had something there for people that were in need. So, second story. A couple years ago, my good friend Chad and I and some other friends are out near Flaming Gorge Reservoir on a deer hunt. And 2 days in, I tagged out, shot my buck, and it was really nice because now I can just sit back and relax, drive around on the side-by-side, be a set of eyes for everyone else, which I really honestly enjoy as much, if not more, is helping other people be successful on a hunt. And so we're out driving around, and we spot on day 4 or 5, we spot a couple of bucks, and my buddies, getting in on them, and we're are somewhere around 400, 500 yards. We have to get up to a ridge, and we've got a couple of his young boys with us, and we're getting up this ridge to get set up so we can shoot across this ravine. And so we get up to the top. I get the boys settled down. He gets up. He's getting ready, gets his shot lined up. Fires, misses. These 2 deer are bedded down at the top of this ridge. He fires, misses. They jump up. As he's reloading, we hear a second shot. Watch one of those deer fall and the other one take off running. And we didn't even see where this other hunter was. We're like, oh man, somebody else is on these deer too. And it looks like they got one. And so we're like, let's go and help them out, look and see how they're doing, make sure that we didn't actually hit that other deer and that we need to go after a wounded animal. So we track around the ridge and come to the other side. And just right over the ridge where that deer had dropped down, there's a guy sitting there with this deer. And we're telling him, oh, good job, man. Congratulations. Like, it was a great shot. It was a really cool little buck, a little 3-point on one side and a spike on the other. It was a really cool looking buck. And he was there alone. And we said, oh, so did you shoot this and get over here that quick? And he said, no, we saw this deer jump up, shot it. My son is running back to the truck uphill like a mile away because they forgot their knives. They didn't have any way to get it out. And this guy is a little bit bigger. They kind of took a shot far away. They're kind of road hunting a little bit, I think. And he's there, with this animal, and we didn't even hesitate. Me and my buddy were like, well, we've got knives. Let's do this right here, right now. Do you mind if we help you? And he said, no, absolutely not. And so we got this deer, cut up and quartered for him. His son got back down to us and helped us through, the last half of getting all that done. And we're loading up hind quarters and back straps and everything into our bags. And one of my buddy's kids is even carrying a back strap in his hands, just walking it down the mountain. They didn't have bags or game bags or anything like that. Mine were already used. So we were just throwing, we're throwing, raw meat into our bags full of stuff to help these guys and get the stuff down the mountain. And we get everything hauled down, and these guys, they didn't have the knives, so they weren't prepared. They didn't have trekking poles or anything to go. We had planned on hiking and doing a lot of crazy stuff. I mean, my buddy's kind of a gear freak, and he's passed it on to me a little bit. So we went prepared with everything we'd need. And so we get everything down the mountain. The dad is, way back up the mountain, way behind us. His son, who actually had just turned his mission papers in and got his call, was talking to him about all that. And we're looking up the mountain, and he said, man, I feel so bad for my dad. He's not the type to ask for help, but I know his knees are killing him. And he just got bad knees, and he's not going to complain, and he's not going to ask for help or anything. He's just a tough guy like that. And something just snapped in me. I didn't know what it was. I just said, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go help him then. And I left my bag, got my trekking poles, and there's a big slope coming down the mountain, but then a big drop off right at the end before it gets to the road where we had parked and we're trying to get down to. And so I hit he was, halfway down the other part of the mountain, and I'm going up the steep incline part. We meet right there at that point. And, I took his bag from him and said, I'm taking that, take the trekking poles. I don't want you to kill yourself. And he was grateful, took them. And I went back down the mountain without the poles and just with my bag, with that bag with, he was carrying a hind quarter and something else, or a front quarter and something else. And we get back down to the bottom, and I just, it's like, I felt good about that. I felt really good that I was able to help him do that. And, he offered and said, we have a cabin here. Anytime you guys want to come, you're more than welcome to. And just super grateful. It turned out he knew who my dad was, kind of a small world up on the mountain. And he, weeks later, ended up sending me a really nice jacket, a hunting jacket. It's a kind of an all-around thing, but it was like a $250 jacket. And he just sent it and said, thank you so much for what you did. You really saved us on the mountain that day. And I was just like, man, I didn't even need that. I had totally forgotten about it by that point. I didn't need anything like that. And that is one of my most prized possessions now is that jacket. But that just felt good and felt right to me. And it just, who wouldn't help? We were already there. I mean, yeah, we could have said, okay, have fun. We're going to go, keep hunting. We've got tags to fill. But we took up a good portion of our day, doing that for him. But it wasn't a second thought for me and my buddy. And, I'm glad that we were there to help him, because I sure as heck wouldn't wanted to get caught up on the mountain unprepared like that and watching somebody else walk away when they could have helped. And this leads me into my third story, which is actually accumulation of several different stories, but just the gist is that I felt a need to serve and help people in a certain capacity. I didn't even really understand at the time why or what it was, but I felt as soon as the opportunity came and I realized and heard about this, my brother turned me onto it and said, "It sounds like you might want to join search and rescue." I thought that was a paid thing. I thought that was something that you had to be highly qualified for. And it turned out you apply and they train you. It's just a volunteer position. And so I did that. I applied, and within a few months, I was approved, contacted, and put on the search and rescue team in my area, and served for the next 4 years on search and rescue, and did a lot of things where people in the back country who were injured, we had to go in and get them secured and pull them out. Unfortunately, a lot of times, there were people there that we couldn't get to in time, and they became recovery operations. We did a lot of searching for missing people that thankfully we were able to recover and bring home safe. And there was a lot of satisfaction that I got from helping other people that had got themselves onto the mountain and got into a place where I feel comfortable, where I feel at peace, and they had gotten out there and got themselves in situations that they weren't prepared for. And I realized this as I'm thinking about serving on search and rescue and being drawn to that, to my feelings I had towards these events at the cabin in Idaho and this event on the mountain, all of these things, by the way, which happened out in nature, and realized that this thing that I'm called to is aligned right with what is my biggest struggle, which is fear and anxiety, which has led me to always be worried about being prepared for what's next and what's coming. And because of that, I've been very much into and focused on, drawn to things like regenerative agriculture, alternative fuels, the gospel, and understanding the gospel at a deep level, being healthy and taking care of our minds and our bodies, and being fit and able and ready for whatever comes. And as we're here in these last days and the second coming draws nearer and nearer, I realize that temporarily, obviously, and all these things I realized I've been doing over the last several years, all these things that personal preparedness, being physically, mentally capable, temporally prepared, spiritually prepared. And all these things I realized recently I've been doing ever since I've been trying to figure out what this overarching umbrella is, and trying to figure out what that purpose is for me. And like I said before, President Nelson has said that I think we'll find that we chose to come here at this time, that we wanted to be safe for this time, because we had particular, proclivities and desires and interests and abilities to push back on what Satan's doing and the battles he's raging in the last days as we get closer to the second coming of Christ. And all these things have led me to have this proclivity towards personal preparedness, towards understanding the gospel and being able to debunk anti-Mormon propaganda, to be able to understand the importance of homeschooling, of families, of making the sacrifices necessary to make sure that my kids have the best opportunities possible and are not indoctrinated into the system today. The ability to have skills that are important and valuable to be able to help other people. All these things I've been very drawn towards. A freedom, liberty is a huge part of it. And all these things conglomerated together, along with my past traumas and anxiety, have pushed me into that, because I'm realizing how hard Satan's working on that and working on me to push me into that fear and anxiety and attacking me in that way. Because my purpose is to push past all of that and get through it and be able to help other people to get through what I've got through with this anxiety, with the fear, and being able to push past it and find what our purpose is and what the Lord wants us to do in this life. So that's going to be a big drive for this podcast, is showing you how I've come through that. And even though I'm still working through it, how to get over that anxiety, get over that fear, find out what it is that you're meant for here in the last days. Why are you here? What role can we play to be an instrument in God's hands? That is the purpose of this podcast. What gifts do you have that the Lord has given you that might be tied to the struggles you've had in this life that you can use to be an instrument in His hands to prepare for Christ's coming in the last days? That's what this podcast is going to be about, guys. I hope that you enjoy it and you come on this journey with me.